Hello, my name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions.
And I'm Proven Paradox, a guy with a lot of questions.
And you're listening to Bright on Buddhism, a podcast where we discuss East Asian Buddhism, answering listener-submitted questions from listeners just like you, and introducing concepts of Buddhism that you may or may not be familiar with in a casual, conversational setting. Enjoy.
Here, who is that bearded man on the road coming from the west?
He is a great teacher. He approached me earlier, asking, "Can you say something to demonstrate your understanding?"
What did you say to him?
I simply held up a flower.
And what happened after that?
He smiled and nodded and went on his way.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. This week we will be discussing Bodhidharma. Who is Bodhidharma? What is the significance to East Asian Buddhism? What are some legends about it? We hope you enjoy. So let's get into it. Who is Bodhidharma?
Bodhidharma was a Buddhist monk and a legendary figure who supposedly lived during the 5th or 6th century Common Era. Bodhidharma is his Dharma name or his monastic name. His birth name is typically thought to have been either Jayavarman or Bodhidana. In Chinese, Bodhidharma is rendered as Puti-damo. In Japanese, it is rendered as Daruma. And in Korean, it's rendered as Dalma. He was an incredibly important figure in Chinese Chan Buddhism. So as a result, there are a great many sources, many of them ahistorical, about his early life. Some say he was a Central Asian Persian man from the Parthian Empire in present-day northeastern Iran, and other sources claim he was the third son of a South Indian monarch, the ruler of the Pallavas, making him a Brahmin. Some sources combine the two and claim one parent was the Pallavan monarch and the other was Central Asian. Hardly anything of note is known about his childhood, except some ahistorical legends and claims that he performed miracles in his youth. We'll discuss some of these legends later. The first big episode in his life is his ordination by a Buddhist teacher known as Prajnatada. Later in history, Prajnatada was attributed as the 27th patriarch of Buddhism, and Bodhidharma the 28th. We'll talk a little bit about what these lineages mean later. During Bodhidharma's training, some legends claim that Prajnatada transmitted several prophecies to Bodhidharma, such as that he would transmit Chan Buddhism to China and become the 28th patriarch, that Chan Buddhism would face turmoil in China during the persecutions, which we described in episode 43, linked in the show notes, and many more prophecies. Speaking to the prophecy that Bodhidharma would transmit Chan Buddhism to China, he did just that. He traveled from either India or Central Asia into China, and he landed in the court of the famous Buddhist Emperor Wu of the Liang dynasty, who ruled from 502 to 549 Common Era. Their interaction is captured in many different versions of Bodhidharma's life, and typically they go something like this. Emperor Wu, how much karmic merit have I earned for ordaining Buddhist monks, building monasteries, having sutras copied, and commissioning Buddha images? Bodhidharma, none. Good deeds done with worldly intent bring good karma, but no merit. Emperor Wu, so what is the highest meaning of noble truth? Bodhidharma, there is no noble truth. There is only emptiness. Emperor Wu, then who is standing before me? Bodhidharma, I know not, Your Majesty. This gives you an impression of Bodhidharma's character. To me, his interactions are always depicted with an intense and insistent tone, but emptiness is that which is being insisted upon, so his message is often about nothingness. This interaction seems to have frustrated both Emperor Wu and Bodhidharma, so the latter left for the northern regions of China with the goal of transmitting the teaching to someone that he deemed worthy of it. He crossed the Yangtze River and arrived in Shaolin, where he allegedly visited the Shaolin monastery, famous for its simultaneous practice of Chan Buddhism and martial arts. For more on this legend, see episode 104, What is the Relationship Between Buddhism and Martial Arts, linked in the show notes. Some accounts claim that it was here in the region of Shaolin, on Mount Song, where Bodhidharma entered a cave to practice his famous 9-year cave wall meditation. He was unhappy with his inability to make an impression in southern China, so he decided to meditate until he could realize a way to spread the teaching and come to a deeper understanding. He sat staring at the cave wall uninterrupted for 9 straight years. One legend holds that he fell asleep 7 years in and became frustrated. Because of the intensity of his practice and devotion, he is said to have cut off his eyelids to prevent falling asleep again. As a result, he's often depicted with a very intense facial expression, with his eyes bulging out of his skull due to missing his eyelids. His discarded lids were held to be the very first cultivated tea leaves, which we'll discuss a little bit more about in a moment. During his meditation, the next patriarch of Chan in China, known as Huike, is also said to have entered the cave in an attempt to become Bodhidharma's disciple. Huike asked Bodhidharma 3 times, and Bodhidharma said no 3 times, as is traditionally held in the sutras when somebody wants to be a disciple of a Buddha. On the 3rd time, Huike is said to have cut off his left arm by way of showing his devotion and seriousness. In another version of the Huike story, Huike was already Bodhidharma's student, but at one point Bodhidharma refused to keep teaching him until he sat vigil for several weeks out in the winter snow. In this version too, Huike cuts off his arm to show his devotion. After the 9-year cave meditation, some accounts of Bodhidharma's life say that he died, but others say that he returned to the Shaolin monastery, and seeing how bad of a shape that the people were in physically, he apparently transmitted knowledge of the martial arts to them, founding or creating the martial art we know today as Kung Fu. After this, he was also said to have traveled all over Southeast Asia, South Asia, more in East Asia, transmitting Chan Buddhism as he went. This is historically impossible, as he would have had to live for centuries in order to be able to accomplish this. And so I see this as a metaphorical description of the transmission of Chan Buddhism all around Southeast Asia and South Asia. It's not clear when Bodhidharma died, or for how long he lived. Several Buddhist thinkers claim to have seen or encountered Bodhidharma for centuries after his alleged death. But these also, again, may be stories borrowing the prestige of Bodhidharma to send some other message, or to advance another agenda, or to borrow some of Bodhidharma's prestige for themselves.
What is his significance to East Asian Buddhism?
Bodhidharma is attributed as the founder of Chinese Chan Buddhism, and thus as a member of several important monastic lineages. He's the 28th patriarch of all Buddhism, which is a constructed lineage of teachers and students extending all the way back to Shakyamuni himself. Again, these lineages may or may not be historical, but their purpose is to construct and represent a total and perfect teaching as given from the historical Buddha himself, in an uninterrupted lineage. Notable links in this lineage include Mahakashapa, Ananda, Ashvaghosha, Nagarjuna, and Vasubandhu, as well as many other important Indian and Central Asian teachers. As the founder of Chan, he's also counted as the first patriarch of Chinese Chan Buddhism. So he's part of 2 different constructed lineages, the Chan lineage and the larger Buddhist lineage stretching all the way back to Shakyamuni. Speaking of his lineage as the 28th patriarch of all Buddhism, Bodhidharma also has a special association with several important Buddhist texts, the most important of which is the Lankavatara Sutra. He's said to have given it to Huike and claimed, quote, "When I examine the land of China, it is clear that there is only this sutra. If you rely on it to practice, you will be able to cross over the world," unquote. This association is not arbitrary. Bodhidharma's teachings are said to emphasize wordless self-realization of the truth of emptiness, which is a very strong theme in the Lankavatara Sutra. His connection to the Lankavatara Sutra also is used as evidence to strengthen the claim that he was South Indian royalty. If you remember, the Lankavatara Sutra is the story of how the Buddhist Dharma arrived down in the region of Sri Lanka. Bodhidharma's disciples claim that he taught entrance into the Buddhist path by principle and entrance by practice. Entrance by principle is described as wordless self-realization and is said to be the result of wall meditation, or sitting in seated meditation facing a wall to minimize distractions, just like he apparently did on Mount Song for 9 years. This practice is said to engage directly with the principle of the Dharma. This is supposed to be combined with entrance by practice. Practice, he describes, is 4-fold: having patience in the face of suffering, being aware that the conditions for good things will eventually run out, seeking for nothing, and being in accord with intrinsic purity. What I love about this presentation is that it contains opposites. Entrance by principle entails a practice, seated meditation. And the fourfold practice entails principles guiding one's practice: patience, awareness of impermanence, contentment, and purity. In this case, we should remember that the word purity refers to moral purity, clarity of mind, and perfection of Buddhist practice.
What are some legends about him?
For starters, Bodhidharma himself could be a fictional figure of legend. It's impossible to construct a meaningful and sensible narrative biography of his life based on the sources we have. Whether or not he actually lived, he became a metaphor for Buddhism itself, writ large, traveling to China, and he became a metaphor for the development of Chan Buddhism in particular. His name and his voice were co-opted textually to serve the needs and agendas of those who discussed him in Chan. There are numerous figures like this in pre-modern South and East Asian textual history. As an example, another figure who was similarly constructed textually was Lao Tzu, the purported author of the Tao Te Ching. Modern scholars think he was actually many people condensed into one. In Bodhidharma's case, he becomes a personification of the teaching he represents, an ideal that represents the highest level of realization and advancement that Chan adherents seek to reach. As that ideal changed and evolved, so too did the story of Bodhidharma himself. Knowing that every story about Bodhidharma could be a fabrication, we can speak about some stories that are obviously so. We've already discussed a couple. First, we mentioned that he cut off his eyelids to maintain his focus during 9 years of cave wall meditation, and that when he discarded the lids, they became the first tea leaves. This is a legend that mythologically connects tea consumption and Zen practice. Green tea has historically been consumed by Chan and Zen practitioners as a way to stay awake and alert during this seated meditation, and this contextualizes that practice in the narrative of Bodhidharma's life. The connection between the removed eyelids and wakefulness caused by tea is quite obvious. This legend is quite old, and as we've mentioned, led to Bodhidharma being depicted visually with his eyes wide open as though he had no eyelids, giving him a very intense look. Another legend about him is the story that he taught Shaolin monastery monks kung fu because he was dissatisfied with how out of shape they were when he visited them. This has been debunked as an incorrect reading of a bad text. In an edition of a Taoist classic called the Yi Jin Jing, or the Classic of Muscle Changes, there was a preface to the text written by a military general, attributed to around 628 Common Era, and a 20th century Chinese scholar claimed that this preface proved that Bodhidharma authored the Yi Jin Jing and left it to the Shaolin monastery when he died. However, this Chinese scholar's claim has been debunked because the narrative described is impossible. The preface in question is completely off chronologically, describing events that would have predated the existence of the Shaolin monastery and Bodhidharma's life by at least 20 years. Furthermore, though the preface is attributed to a 7th century military general, the first edition of the Yi Jin Jing has been dated to 1624, making it totally anachronistic with the purported life of Bodhidharma. This legend was simply self-serving to the Shaolin monastery's reputation. Bodhidharma became a bit of a mascot for Shaolin Kung Fu and gave it a prestigious reputation, which no doubt carried the monastery through the economically and culturally troubled times of early 20th century China. The encounter with Emperor Wu of the Liang dynasty may also be an invention. Something we haven't discussed yet on the show is the schism between Chinese Chan Buddhists over the question of sudden versus gradual enlightenment. The schism was actually caused by far more than that, but this issue has been spotlighted as a deal-breaking point between these two schools. The Northern Chan tradition adhered to the idea of gradual enlightenment, and the Southern school was that of sudden enlightenment. The Northern school, due to many historical factors, was the more influential of the two. In addition, Bodhidharma's disciple, Hui Neng, was from the southern regions of China, but traveled to train with the Northern school early in his life. The story that Bodhidharma tried and failed to teach the Southern Emperor Wu of Liang his teaching may be a case where the Northern school was trying to claim preeminence using the narrative of Bodhidharma's life as a vehicle. There will be much more to discuss about that point when we read and discuss the Platform Sutra, attributed to Hui Neng's disciple Fa Hai, which describes Hui Neng's ascension as the 6th patriarch of Northern Chan Buddhism. Jumping ahead in history, we can also start to discuss Bodhidharma's historical and cultural legacy. For starters, Bodhidharma is a regular character in The Gateless Gate, the 13th century compilation of koans that we've been reading from for the koan series. Case 37 is, quote, "A monk asked Jiao Zhou, 'What is the meaning of Bodhidharma's coming from the west?' Jiao Zhou said, 'The cypress tree in front of the hall.'" Unquote. Case 41 from the same text is, quote, "Bodhidharma sat facing the wall. The second patriarch, either Huike or Dao Yu, depending on if you're northern or southern school, standing in the snow, cut off his arm and said, 'Your disciple's mind is not yet at peace. I beg you, master, give it rest.' Bodhidharma said, 'Bring your mind to me, and I will put it to rest.' The patriarch said, 'I have searched for the mind, but have never been able to find it.' Bodhidharma said, 'I have finished putting it to rest for you.'" Unquote. Bodhidharma also comes up in 14 koans from the Shinji Shobogenzo, attributed to Japanese Zen patriarch Dogen. In these texts, his presentation is influenced strongly by the legends about him that have circulated across history. He's often described as a rather intense teacher. When he speaks, he is admonishing or exhorting those who are listening to penetrate to a far deeper understanding. He is also described as a bearded barbarian from the West, referring to his origins from the west of China. This barbaric and gruff imagery is often seen in connection with the legend of him founding Shaolin Kung Fu. It made him out to be rough around the edges. It also fits in with the image of him as a cave-dwelling hermit engaging in wall meditation for 9 years. Finally, I'd like to leave off with a mention of Japanese Daruma dolls, originating from Japan in the 18th century in a city called Takasaki in Gunma Prefecture. These are round little dolls with no arms or legs, allegedly because Bodhidharma's arms and legs atrophied after sitting in the cave for 9 years. These are little good luck charms that can be purchased to this day, and there's even an annual festival celebrating them in the city of Takasaki.
We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion of Bodhidharma. Join us next week where we will be discussing mandalas in Buddhism. What are mandalas? What is their significance in Buddhism? How ought we understand them? We hope to see you there. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Hi, Nick here, and you've been listening to Bright on Buddhism. Normally at this point in the episode, we would throw to a charity that we think that is deserving of your money or your support. Because there's so much going on right now, we have decided that we're going to open it up to any charity that you think is a good cause to share your resources with. So, if you like our show and would like to support us, please instead give to a charity that you believe does good things for people in need. Thank you.
My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and voice of hearer.
And I'm Dox, editor, question asker, and voice of hermit.
And this has meant Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have a question you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment or review, subscribing, or joining us on social media. Email us at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com or find us on Mastodon at brightbuddhism@mstdn.party. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.